Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Breaking History. We have a lot to go through today, this is going to be a wild ride, I'm sure, as it always tends to be. Gordon will be joining us very, very shortly, but before he does, we're going to listen to a word from today's sponsor. Oh, there you are. Hey, Gordon. All right, you just came in time for the word from today's sponsor.
Let's do it.
All right. So we've got here Goldco. The last 4 years have put so much stress on American family finances. Help end the stress now and celebrate the golden age with President Trump by diversifying with gold and silver. Remember President Trump's first term? Gold increased by 55%. Don't wait. Diversify your hard-earned assets and buy your gold from Goldco with no purchase minimums. Goldco has been established as a top-rated precious metals company and a leader in the gold industry, providing white glove treatment for over 10 years. Their buyback guarantee assures you that if your situation changes, they will repurchase your metals at the best price, providing you with peace of mind. You may even qualify for up to 10% back in your bonus silver. Visit badlandsgold.com to claim your free information and instantsilver.com/badlands to see how much free silver you can get. Find out the relationship between gold, silver, Trump, and you with the free report focused on Trump and your financial future. That's badlandsgold.com and instantsilver.com/badlands to take control of your financial destiny. Okay, so Gordon, I know you and we've both been getting a lot of people writing into us asking questions about, specifically the Israel front. I know that's something that's been, you've created a space for yourself as somebody who's got a very unique and I think very important perspective, and you appreciate a spectrum of facts that are usually ignored by people by most experts I encounter, at least, who are trying to give their 2 cents, their 2 kopecks about how to think about Trump, especially Trump's relationship to the Zionist machinery, the Gaza more generally, or the Middle East even more broadly than that. And obviously there are some contradictory messaging going on. It's not simple. The universe, the reality is never simple. But in the real politics, sometimes people say things, they intend to do another thing, but they say one thing, or they do one thing with an intention of having it undone later on. There's a whole bunch of games within games. So I think we have a plethora of these things. Now Trump has made certain things that I think for many who are hoping for peace in the Middle East, as Trump, I believe, really does want. I think he knows that blowing up the world is bad for business. So I do think he wants peace in the Middle East. But I think that there's also certain things like his release of these 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, or his messaging that Egypt and Jordan should start taking in hundreds of thousands of Gaza refugees. Or I forget, there was some country in Europe as well where he suggested that some of these Gazans maybe go and get sent to Eastern Europe or something like that. That confuses and I think demoralizes a lot of people. But again, how are you thinking about this right now?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And everyone, I totally understand why a lot of people who have been following my writing and people who have been following this in general and don't have the traditional view of Israel that I think a lot of people in the quote unquote Republican demographic tend to have, where they look at it from a more objective standpoint and see that there are issues with some of the warmongering that's come out of that country. And there's obviously a lot of consternation and concern about some of these developments that we're seeing from Trump. I'd like to real quick, I want to play this. Let me just open this. So I'm not going to play this whole video. We've watched it before on this show. There's no reason to watch the whole thing, but I want to scrub to the very end and show you. So this is this video I put together about the Oslo Accords.
Right.
And so I want to scrub to the very end so here's Abbas. This is the president of Palestine who signed the Oslo Accords in 1993. telling Donald Trump, he's speaking at a press conference on May 3rd, 2017. He's giving the whole press conference in Arabic because he doesn't really speak English. But then he stops at the very end of his speech and he says in English, "Because of you, Donald Trump, we have hope." And then Trump gets up and says something. I want everyone to listen to what Trump says. It's very important what he says right here. And then we're going to talk about it. So everyone just bear with me here.
A peace treaty understood to bring about.
Now, Mr. President, with you, we have hope.
To start a process. We've spoken to Bibi Netanyahu. We've spoken to many of the great Israeli leaders. We've spoken with many of your great representatives. Many of them are here today for lunch with us. We'll start a process which hopefully will lead to peace. Over the course of my lifetime, I've always heard that perhaps the toughest deal to make is the deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Let's see if we can prove them wrong. Okay? Good. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Let's see if we can prove them wrong. This is the hardest deal to make. Let's see if we can prove them wrong. Okay? He acknowledges in that moment, he acknowledges that Abbas is the one who signed the Oslo Accords. He makes a commitment in that moment that I want to be the president who makes sure that you, the guy who signed the first peace deal that was supposed to set up a two-state solution, I want to make sure that you are the guy, Mahmoud Abbas, who signs the final and most important peace deal that finalizes the two-state solution and creates it. And he said, throughout my life, this is the hardest deal to make. Everyone said, this is the hardest deal to make. And I want to be the guy to make it, basically. Like, let's go prove those people wrong. So on my other show that I just started, the Book of Trump, we just did The Art of the Deal on Monday. And I brought on CanCon, Brian Lupo, who has been doing a book club on his own Rumble channel recently, going through chapter by chapter on that book. And so I went back and reread the book, which I haven't read since Trump's first term. And it was very enlightening. I actually took a lot more from it than I thought I was going to, having read it now, like with everything we've lived through over the past several years. And the thing that really stood out to me from reading that book and also watching The Apprentice, which I'd never seen before to prepare for the other show I did, I really appreciate the fact that Donald Trump, his drive, the thing that gets him out of bed in the morning, is not money, which he demonstrates many times in the book. He demonstrates that there are a lot of things that he does in the book back in the 80s where he's losing money or he's doing things that are not, maximizing his return financially, or he's throwing a lot of money into a lawfare case that is not supposed to yield a financial reward. It's more about proving a point. He's not motivated by money. He's motivated by this ambition to be the guy to put a deal together. He wants to take a problem that is considered very difficult to solve and solve it. He likes to solve things. That's his whole thing. It's his whole ethos. It's his whole personality. He describes himself at the very beginning of the book as an artist, and instead of working with clay or paint, his art form is deal making. The thrill of putting a deal together is what gets him up in the morning and gets him working. And even at 80 years old, 79 years old, that's what gets him to keep working and not just retire and play golf and hang out with his supermodel wife. Right. So if you believe that, if you understand that about him and you accept that as that's who Donald Trump is, I personally don't look at the assertion that he is a Zionist puppet and that he is basically going to kowtow to these special interest groups, which would be AIPAC and the Israeli lobby, something he's spoken out against since before he ran for office, about not bowing to special interests. Now special interests control politics. And he's always been very, very firm in that needs to end. And that's what he wants his presidency to ultimately do, is to end the control of special interests over the U.S. government. And so it wouldn't make any sense for that to be his legacy, that he is going to basically bend the knee to those people, let them do whatever they want, let them run roughshod over him and his administration, and basically do whatever they want with Palestine, and Israel is free to be whatever it wants to be. Like, as far as Bibi Netanyahu sees it, it doesn't make any sense to me. He also loses the opportunity to be the guy to bring peace to the Middle East, to do the two-state solution, to do the thing that nobody else said could be done. Like,
I got a question on this point, and I do very much appreciate those points of consideration. There was a lot of effort that Trump put into creating the Abraham Accords to recognize Israel, to normalize relations with as many Arab countries around Israel as possible in order to reduce tension, create an improved business climate, a climate for trust and building. But then you mentioned to me a hypothesis that he might be jettisoning that original model of the Abraham Accords right now, since Israel is trying to maneuver itself in order to enmesh some Arab nations around it in a very destructive thing. Maybe you could you explain that a little bit more of your thinking?
Absolutely. So I posted a link in the Badlands news brief a week or two ago. Back before I joined Badlands, I used to do a show with a guy named Ron Partain. You've actually done a show with him before,
Yep.
Untold History. Very, very smart historian. He's actually the guy who got me to start doing podcasting. Like, I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for him. So him and I used to do a show together on his channel, Untold History. We did like 45 episodes, very similar to this show, where we do like a news cycle through the lens of history kind of thing. And one of the first shows we did, I think it was like the 6th show we did, was after the Kanye West like whole situation, when Kanye West kind of like went AWOL and the media turned on him, and that whole like anti-Semite thing unfolded. And that was the first time I ever talked about the Middle East, I think, on camera. And my assertion back then was, the way that I viewed the Abraham Accords was, it didn't seem like the Abraham Accords were designed to protect Israel from the Middle East. To me, it seemed like the Abraham Accords was some sort of a diplomatic weapon, or some sort of a deployment that was ultimately designed to protect the rest of the Middle East from Israel. If you understand the actual history of what's happened there, and the aggression that we've seen from the Israeli state, despite what our media has presented to us here in the West. And I actually feel more confident about that. Like, and that was a very early kind of analysis before I really dug deep into a lot of this stuff. And I'm so much more knowledgeable about this stuff than I was back then. That was really just more of like an instinctual assertion. But now that I've like dug deep into it, I actually think that instinct was pretty spot on, because the Abraham Accords has forced Netanyahu into the situation. Like, it forced the October 7th moment to happen, which I do believe to some extent the Israeli government was a part of. Whether they orchestrated the whole thing or they just knew it was going to happen and they just let it happen, I think it's like the net effect is still the same, which is that they get the mandate then to go start the 7-front war with all their neighbors and kind of turn over the apple cart and pursue this greater Israel project. But what Netanyahu has done, we saw this with his UN speech last year, and then he came to America first, I think, and spoke to the Senate, or spoke to the combined Congress, and said that he wants America and the Arab nations, the Arab partners, to join him in going to war with Iran, and he wants to start a war between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam, which is Iran, the Persian axis, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, Iraq, maybe, against the rest of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Israel, Egypt. And that's also what the Republican Party wants. That's what the Zionists and the Republican Party wants. It's what AIPAC wants. It's what Lindsey Graham has been calling for. It's what, I mean, everyone who's been sitting here pounding the war drum saying war with Iran, war with Iran, war with Iran. That's the end game. The end game is to Saudi Arabia in a war with Iran.
Yeah.
So right now, when Trump comes out, like, I'll get to the 2,000-pound bomb thing in a minute, but let's just talk about his call for quote unquote ethnic cleansing. Okay. So before I do that, let me play this other video, because I think this is going to be enlightening. When Trump said to Abbas, he said, "We've spoken to Bibi Netanyahu, in the great Israeli people, like the great Israeli leaders." Here is what he's talking about. So 3 months before that, This is February 15th, 2017. Netanyahu comes to the White House and they have their first meeting, and this is the press conference. So let's now watch this.
Mm-hmm.
As far as settlements, I'd like to see you hold back on settlements for a little bit.
And secondly, on the settlement issue, are you both on the same page?
As far as settlements, I'd like to see you hold back on settlements for a little bit. We'll work something out, but I would like to see a deal be made. I think a deal will be made. Bibi and I have known each other a long time. A smart man, great negotiator, and I think we're going to make a deal. It might be a bigger and better deal than people in this room even understand. That's a possibility. So let's see what we do.
Let's try it.
Doesn't sound too optimistic, but that's he's a good negotiator.
That's the art of the deal.
Yeah, and so Netanyahu, you have to think that Netanyahu saying that at the end, that's the art of the deal. I'm sure that probably pissed Trump off because he kind of throws Trump's, most famous book right in his face and says, that's the art of the deal. Like, I'm a better negotiator than you. And if you believe that Trump has an ego, and I'm sure he most certainly does, all great leaders do. That rubbed him the wrong way. That he was not happy about the way that that Netanyahu acted in that moment. And he paid him back, by the way, in that other video that I've posted. 2 weeks after that meeting with the boss on May 3rd, he goes to Israel and he disrespects Netanyahu in front of his media. We don't have to watch the video, but I do want to show you this, just in case people are uncertain, maybe Trump's position has changed. Let me show you this video, which I'm sure we've watched before on this show. So this is from an interview with Barak Ravid, who's Trump's favorite Israeli journalist, on December 21st, 2021. So this is almost a year after Trump leaves office. And listen to what he tells Barak Ravid, which is then relayed to the Israeli people. This message, by the way, is never told to the American public. Listen.
What did you think when Bibi started talking about annexing parts of the West Bank?
I got angry and I stopped it because that was really going too far. That was going way too far. When he did the big let's take everything and just start building on it. And we were not happy about that.
I heard that in your first meeting, you told him, what's the problem if you stop building for a while, for a year, for 2 years, stop building in the settlements?
Yeah,
and he wasn't very happy with that.
And I said, why are you doing this? Bibi did not want to make a deal. Bibi, most recently, when we came up with the maps and the this and the that, this is good, everything was always great, but he was never, he did not want to make a deal. Now, I don't know if he didn't want to make it for political reasons or for other reasons. I wish he would have said he didn't want to make a deal instead of, because a lot of people devoted a lot of work, but I don't think Bibi would have ever made a deal. That's my opinion. I think the general wanted to make a deal.
Yeah, so the general he's talking about is he's referring to Benny Gantz, and I think I've mentioned it before on the show that how Trump encouraged Benny Gantz to run against Netanyahu, and that kind of started the whole downfall of Netanyahu, and he's clinging to life right now politically because of that whole process. So ultimately, what we're hearing there is Trump is saying, I got angry and I stopped it. The idea of the settlements in the West Bank. Now, what's really fascinating about that disclosure there is that part of the Abraham Accords, Palestine and Saudi Arabia were intentionally left out. I think that was by design. I think that was all part of this strategy that, the peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, that's everything. That's what gives you peace in the Middle East, because that's the ancestral homeland of Islam. But Faisal bin Farhan, as soon as they signed the Abraham Accords in September of 2020, which Netanyahu did not want to do, he tried to back out, and then Trump twisted his arm and made him do it. As soon as that happens, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, sends Faisal bin Farhan, his foreign minister, on a mission to start the two-state solution path, basically to extend the Abraham Accords to include Saudi Arabia and Palestine. Now, the maps that were presented by Jared Kushner to Netanyahu in order to get Netanyahu on board with the original Abraham Accords showed the West Bank being carved up like Swiss cheese. So basically, you'd have all these huge holes in the West Bank that would go to Israel. And that was really the only reason that they were able to get Netanyahu and his team even to the table, was because they were offering portions of the West Bank like Swiss cheese, like in the future, not as part of the original deal, but hey, here's what we're thinking. Like once we bring Saudi Arabia and Palestine in, here's what we're thinking, right? Mahmoud Abbas and the Arab League literally like took that map and like tore it up. They're like, there's absolutely no way we'd agree to this. It's a non-starter. You're hearing that same position, I think, from Trump in that Barack Ravid interview, where he's saying, I do not think it's okay to annex parts of the West Bank. So he's kind of contradicting himself from the maps that Jared Kushner was bringing to Netanyahu. And then ultimately, I think what this is about is it's getting Netanyahu to the table, getting the deal done, moving the ball down the field. And then when Saudi Arabia comes in and says in 2023, September 2023, and says, all right, here you go. We got the deal done. This is what we agreed to. Sign it. Then October 7th happens, right? So at this point, where we are in the ball game is that Steve Wachowski has gone over there. This is like right before the inauguration. He's orchestrated this 3-phase deal that is a ceasefire with a phased hostage release program, where basically for every Israeli hostage released by Hamas, Israel releases about 200, anywhere from 50 to 200 Palestinian hostages. And when these Palestinian hostages are not necessarily Hamas fighters, these are like women and children, men who have been sitting in prison, who have been captured and basically taken to prison and not charged with anything, and they've been kept there for years. Some of these people have been in jail for 30 years. So these people are being released like incrementally as the Israeli hostages are being released. And that's a big reason why Ben-Gvir resigned from the government, because he said, you're releasing people that we've had in prison and basically been torturing for 20 years. Like, these people are going to go back and they're going to become terrorists and they're going to attack the Israeli state, because why wouldn't they hate us? We've had them in prison without charges for decades. Smotrich, Gvir and his Ben-Gvir and his party leaves the coalition. Smotrich, the finance minister, and his party, Religious Zionism, which is considered he's considered a much more respected statesman than Gvir is. Gvir is more of a cartoonish clown. Smotrich has said, if we don't resume the war, if we allow, so the first phase is done, we're now in the second phase. He says, if the second phase of this deal is allowed to complete without the war resuming, I will be leaving the government with my party, and the government will collapse because Netanyahu will lose the 60-seat majority in the Knesset that he needs to stay in power. Netanyahu will lose his title as prime minister, and new elections will be scheduled, 3 months from whenever the collapse occurs. I think that's probably what's going to happen. I think that we're probably, hopefully, I think that's what the goal. If I'm Donald Trump and I'm Steve Wachowski, that's my goal. My goal is to get the second phase complete, force Smotrich, who is being pressured by the Israeli settler movement and by his coalition, to abandon the government, abandon Netanyahu. It's like all the pressure is on him to leave the government. Netanyahu feels that pressure, which is why Netanyahu keeps saying, well, we might actually continue the war. Like just because we're doing the hostage deal doesn't mean we're not going to keep fighting. Let's stay reasonable here. So what Trump does, he comes in and he says, all right, these 2,000-pound bombs that y'all have already paid for, you paid Biden for them months ago. Biden stopped sending them to you. He still sent you the 500-pound bombs, but the 2,000-pound bombs, y'all were basically just dropping in the city and killing women and children. So that's why Biden stopped sending them to them, because it was bad optics. Trump's like, I'm going to send you those bombs. Hey, Hamas, I'm sending the bombs. So now Hamas has every reason to stay in the deal and not do anything shady. Like Hamas, that gets Hamas at the table, and it's like, these guys are getting their bombs. So if you back out of the deal or do anything funny, they're going to continue their war. It also takes excuses away from Netanyahu, where Netanyahu can say, well, here's X, Y, and Z why we don't feel comfortable and we're going to back out, because we're not getting our 2,000-pound bombs. We're not getting the support we need from the American government, whatever it is. He's taking away every single little excuse that Netanyahu is going to use to try to thwart the deal. What Ben Gvir admitted to 2 weeks ago when he resigned from the government is he admitted in public on video that it was him who thwarted every single hostage deal negotiation over the past year and a half. He said, but if you go back and you check the tape and you check the archives, every single time the hostage deal fell apart, Netanyahu blamed Hamas. And he said it was Hamas who changed the terms of the deal. It was Hamas who moved the goalposts. It was Hamas. It's their fault that we're not doing a deal right now. And Ben Gvir came out and said, actually, it was us who did it. We're the ones who changed the terms of the deal. Or we gave Hamas a reason to walk away from the table. Now Trump is basically giving Hamas every incentive to stay in the deal, because if they go back, if they walk away, the war is going to resume and they're going to have 2,000-pound bombs. So, and Hamas is not stupid. They're being advised, I think, by the Qataris. They're being advised by Iran. They're being advised by smart people who are probably telling them, hey, man, if you want Netanyahu out, the best thing you can do right now is to hold your ground and don't walk away, because if you go through it with phase 2, Smotrik's going to leave. Reuters, by the way, is reporting this now. This is a mainstream thing. Reuters is now reporting that Trump has trapped Netanyahu Netanyahu's trapped between Trump and Smotrik. And no matter what he does, he's going to piss somebody off. So that brings us now to the ethnic cleansing thing. So everyone's really confused by that. They're like, why is Trump saying that we're going to do this, like the ethnic cleansing? I was listening to Judge Napolitano. Judge Napolitano is apoplectic over this. This is one of Trump's old friends. He's a legal mind. He's like, this is ethnic cleansing. And all of his guests who are, military generals or colonels and other experts like CIA analysts, they're all in a complete agreement. They're like, absolutely, under international law, this is ethnic cleansing, what Trump is calling for. And it's morally unjustifiable. I don't think Trump really means that to clean out Gaza. I think what he's doing is he's doing two things. Number one, the Cradle has now revived, which is a Turkish-based outlet. They've Lebanese based.
What's that? It's based in Lebanon.
Oh, I'm sorry. Lebanese, correct. They have revived this document that got released or leaked a week after October 7th. A document was released from the Israel, leaked by the Israeli government that showed definitively that the authorities in Tel Aviv were already planning an ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Like, this was something that predated October 7th by many, many months at the very least, if not years. And so that document's now front and center, and it's getting renewed attention. It's showing that this is all premeditated. If I'm Netanyahu, that's the last thing I want happening right now. The last thing you want is the Arabs all talking about the fact that this was something that was thought about before October 7th, because now, while you have the Republicans in D.C. calling for war with Iran, you have Netanyahu calling for war with Iran and asking the Arabs to help him. You have this wedge being driven between the Arabs and Netanyahu, because what Trump said on Air Force One the other day is he said, look, Sisi is my guy. This is the president of Egypt. He's my guy. He's going to do it like whatever I tell him to do, basically. King Abdullah in Jordan, he's my guy as well. Like, he's going to go along with this. Both of them are going to accept Palestinians. All right, we're basically just going to send 50% of Palestine to Egypt, 50% of Palestine to Jordan, call it a day, right? All like easy, done. Both of them come out and say, over my dead body is that going to happen? There's no way, because if they allow that to happen, they would be dragged out into the street and probably killed. Like, and I'm not even kidding. That's what McGregor has been saying for 8 months, that they're both facing that kind of potential revolution, given the apparent inaction against the aggression on Palestine. Mahmoud Abbas has come out and said the same thing. Over our dead body, will Palestine accept this? Trump then comes out and doubles down and says, no. Like, I understand they're saying that, but trust me, once I talk to them, yeah, we're definitely going to do this. It's having studied like all the rhetoric that Trump has said in the past, like in The Art of a Deal, of how you negotiate. This is not how, if Trump was serious about doing this deal, this is not how you would go about doing it. You wouldn't go to the media and
Okay.
make this deployment. You would make this in like a private conversation and convince them privately, and then come out with a united front and be like, here's how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
This is not the way that you would go about orchestrating, like piecing this deal together, which is why I think this is more about twofold. It's about driving a wedge between Israel and the Arab partners, which is effectively breaking up the Abraham Accords temporarily, I think, because I think ultimately he will bring it all back together. But it's also you're subverting this call for a united front against Iran, which is the goal, a war between Iran and the Arabs. But you're also regurgitating or recycling this forgotten memory hole deployment that this leaked document came out of Tel Aviv proving that this is all premeditated. The plan all along was to ethnically cleanse Gaza and make it part of Israel. And now you have you have Ben-Gvir rushing back out of the closet and saying, well, I know I already resigned from the government, but if we're going to do this, hell yeah, I'll come back. Like, let's do it, guys. So I think this is all strategic. We got to see it play out. But I'll pass it to you because I've been going for a long time. But I have one last thing on this to share, and then we can move on.
Yeah, no, I think what you're going through, people, it's important to be reminded of these, because people have a tendency, and I noticed this just as a point of just basic psychology, being born under an oligarchical system has certain effects. One of those effects is that we, as citizens born into this world, that we didn't create it. There was already a dynamic in play that was multifaceted, generations, centuries, millennia before we were born, right? And when oligarchical systems become too successful at enmeshing themselves into a host, I think of it really like a virus thing that just kind of like latches onto, like a parasite, a host. Certain consequences always happen, one of which is an encouragement of the minds of those who will be victimized by the cultural standards, both in terms of the academic system, the educational system, the economic, as well as cultural systems, to be more fragmented, more myopic, less inclined to be able to see a whole, and more trained to look at details of branches and leaves and not see the forest. So that's one of the things, right? So to the degree that we can our minds are trained by the education system, it's just the way it is, not our fault, but we become hyper specialized, hyper myopic, to not be able to see how every single field of thought is actually part of a broader whole. We don't see that. We become hyper specialized in that sense, which also churns out, as far as the education system is always subservient to the economic model that is active in the society. So the types of workers that will be needed for that particular type of economic structure will be what the education system churns out. So if you have a consumer society of services, financial services, that doesn't have any long-term goals, if that becomes the dominant economic system, then the schools will be wired to produce the types of people that will fill those positions within the services go nowhere society. And then, that'll happen. And you compare the type of qualitative education we were getting in the 1950s and 60s. You read the textbooks, even in the 1940s and 30s, of what was expected out of a student back then, compared to what types of standards have been mediocritized today. It's embarrassing how bad it's fallen. So people tend to think in that type of system mechanically. They look for like a very mechanistic, A causes B causes C type of approach to things. And when somebody thus says something, they immediately jump to conclusions, right? Or they see a pattern in one place and they see a pattern in another place, and they immediately say, oh, it's close enough, it fits, thus I'll make a judgment, which is usually wrong. It's usually premature, and it causes people to lose sight of the truth of the dynamic interplay. The life is dynamic. It's not mechanic. It's dynamic. And so what you've just gone through, as far as shaping the different considerations of what evidence we can use to triangulate in on the intentions and methodology of not just Trump, but also those who he has worked with, like El-Sisi, like MBS, like many others, even people within the Israeli administration that don't want to go all Samson option, right? So presumably there's evidence that there's a number of people wielding degrees of political power who are not like Ben-Gvir and would rather do business and just have a good life without blowing up the world and committing suicide. There are those people, and those are the people that Trump is trying to activate within Israel. And it's not easy because it's a cult. It's a blood and soil cult that's baked in to the entire psychology of the governing class of a big chunk of the Zionist apparatus. So that is a difficult bomb to defuse. So what you've just said, as far as the groundwork, the strategy for the Abraham Accords, how a temporary, pulling back from the Abraham Accords in order to create a different type of dynamic that would solidify the front that wants development and not war with Iran. That's all very, very good stuff, man. And I don't know if there actually, I have some thoughts on the other, or some questions actually for you. But before I do any of that, as far as it pertains Trump's battles with the color revolutionary apparatus around U.S. aid and the NED inside of America, are there any other points that you think people should hold in mind pertaining to this particular subject here of Israel and Gaza?
Yes, thank you. Real quick, and I appreciate all that feedback and those thoughts, because I know this stuff is really hard to grapple with because it's so emotional and there's so much history and there's so many forces at work that are much bigger than Donald Trump and much more historic than Donald Trump in this moment. So I recognize all that, and I try really hard not to engage with hopium, as a lot of people accuse me of doing that. People who are hyper anti-Israel and view Israel as something that needs to be absolutely decimated. We talked about last week how that would deliver the same net result as the Greater Israel Project, is if we saw the world kind of come after Israel and bomb it out of existence. That would kind of create, I think, a similar net effect where you would get a regional war probably that would become a world war potentially. So that is part of this. I think this whole negotiation, this dance that Trump is involved in. So I'll remind everyone that Trump appointed Mike Huckabee before he appointed really anybody else. Like, one of his first big appointments was the Israeli ambassador. The second I heard that, it was early on a Tuesday morning, I started laughing because I was like, I cannot believe he actually just appointed the Israeli ambassador before like the State Department, like the Secretary of State, SecDef, like any of that. Like, that's going to trigger the entire, anti-Israel movement. And then he went on that same day and appointed like 11 more Zionists, including Pete Hegseth, Kristi Noem, like all those people were appointed. Like, he hit the entire AIPAC list. He hit them in his cabinet all in one day. And then the next day, Chris Paul and I covered it on Badlands Daily. And that stuck out to my mind. I was like, there's something significant there. I've talked about before about how Mike Huckabee was a very, very odd choice considering his position that Palestine is an illegitimate idea and there's no such thing as Palestine. Like, that didn't make any sense to me. There's something strategic about that decision. That then is counterbalanced by Michael Domino, who we talked about last week. He's the Pentagon official that Trump appointed. And for those who maybe didn't catch last week's show, since then, this is like in the past week, we've seen a lot of articles come out from Jewish outlets with this kind of headline. Trump's appointee for Pentagon Middle East advisor has called for pressure on Israel. We're really there to counter Iran, and that's really at the behest of the Israelis and the Saudis, Michael Domino said of the U.S. troop presence in Iraq and Syria. Here's another one. Pro-Israel Republicans alarmed over Trump's Defense Department appointee. And this is the one that kind of triggered my research into Michael Domino, because this is from January 21st. You have this one, Mitch McConnell. He's alarmed over some of Trump's Pentagon hires. How did they survive the vetting process? So you have a lot of these like establishment Republicans freaking out over this guy, Michael Domino, and what he's doing. And then, as we saw yesterday, the U.S. is now sending dozens of Patriot missiles from Israel to Ukraine, about 90 of these Patriot missiles, which I don't know if you remember, but when the Patriot missile system got deployed to Israel last year, that was like a huge deal. People made a huge deal out of that. Even though like we had been sending Patriot missiles to them for a long time, people made a really big deal about this new system and like 120 troops going over there with it as the support infrastructure. They made a huge deal over this system going over there. Now this system is being sent to Ukraine. It's being redirected away from Israel. It's something that has been in the works since last year, but it's happening now. Netanyahu agreed to it in September. He had to get on the phone with Zelensky and negotiate with them. It says right here that Netanyahu, he wanted to get Zelensky's approval for the ultra-Orthodox Israelis to make their annual pilgrimage to the city of Uman in Ukraine, because that's where a famous rabbi is buried. It's considered a holy city. And Zelensky said he wouldn't even get on the phone with him until Netanyahu approved the Patriot deal, which he did. So now they're getting sent over there with Trump back in office. They're finally getting sent over there. But, so in the art of the deal, Trump talks about it's really important to be flexible when you put a deal together. It's really important to have multiple lines in the water. You shouldn't get too attached to one outcome. You shouldn't even get too attached to one deal, because more often than not, deals fall apart and they don't work. But what I'm seeing happening here is I'm seeing a multi-prong approach with this deal, because not only do you have Trump doing his narrative deployments at the highest level, he's kind of like drawing all the fire on him, right? He comes out and he makes these bold, boisterous statements about ethnic cleansing. Everyone comes after him, and because everyone's directing their fire at him, his agents, so to speak, can go about their business without being disrupted. You have Michael Domino making his moves in the Pentagon. You have Steve Witkoff. He flew to Saudi Arabia on Monday, met with MBS yesterday, did the whole negotiation with MBS, did the whole negotiation with the Saudi government about how we're going to get the two-state solution implemented, how we're going to preserve Palestine, how we're basically going to do all the things the opposite of what Trump just said in his Air Force One gathering, impromptu press conference. And then the next day, so today, right now, it says right here, on Wednesday, Witkoff will visit Israel and meet with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. So he goes to Saudi Arabia. He's like assuring the Saudis that, hey, man, it's all good. Like, we're doing this. Who knows what he's actually saying to them, but you have to think he's probably giving them assurances that there's not going to be an ethnic cleansing in Gaza, because the blowback on that would hit Riyadh as well.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say is that you have Trump dangling this carrot out in front of Netanyahu. He set up as his first his first foreign dignitary who's going to come to the White House is going to be Netanyahu on February 4th next week.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like dangling this little carrot out for Netanyahu, like, hey man, go through with it. Like, stay on board. Like, you don't want to screw things up before you come see me at the White House. So you better keep this hostage deal on track. Don't back out. Come see me next week. We'll talk face to face. It'll look really good for you in the polls at home. Maybe you'll win back some of that support from the center that you've lost over the past couple of years. This could be good for you. At the same time, you have Smotrich. Smotrich has other reasons to abandon Netanyahu. It's not just the hostage deal. This Haredi conscription bill. This is the bill. The whole time Israel has existed, everyone in Israel is forced to serve in the IDF. There is an exemption for ultra-Orthodox Jews because they go and they study the Torah. They go study the Talmud. And so their studies are considered their service to the state, because then they go on and become rabbis or whatever. Recently, the Supreme Court in Israel reversed that and said, no, y'all need to go do military service. And this has caused a huge uprising in the ultra-Orthodox community to say, absolutely not. We're not going to serve in the military. It's against our belief system. And Smotrich is the one receiving all the pressure of this. So that's also another reason for Smotrich to pull out. It's not just the hostage deal. It's this as well, because Netanyahu's like, yeah, I guess the Supreme Court said we got to do it. The IDF guys are telling me that we're short on soldiers. So yeah, we're probably going to have to bring these guys in and force them to serve. By the way, these are the guys who also want greater Israel. So if you want it, you got to go fight for it. So there are a lot of lines in the water. There's a lot of pressure points that are happening that are going to potentially break up the coalition, bring Netanyahu down. But at the same time, Trump is dangling a carrot in front of Netanyahu to keep him at the table, because he doesn't want Netanyahu to walk away from the peace deal. He wants the peace deal to stay on. and then for the government to organically collapse underneath him. I think that's my read on it. I don't know if that's true, but that's the way I read it.
Yeah, no, it's so delicate, and it would have to go if this is going to get clean. If we're going to make it through this crisis, it has to look something similar to what you just outlined. It has to be something like that, because there aren't that many choices to move through this minefield. One thing that I know is a definite built-in trap is, as you pointed out, this October 13th strategy document that was declassified by, I don't know if it was the IDF or Shin Bet or some combination, but it was an official strategy white paper that, basically called for the ethnic cleansing, right? And sending all the, whatever it is, 2.1 million Gazans or however many haven't been killed yet into the adjacent regions, especially Egypt and Jordan. Now, part of that program is that there's a real human factor here where people have suffered now for 18, 19 months. I've lost track of just seeing their families wiped out, their friends, the amount of injustice and horror that these people have been subjected to is mind-boggling. And that changes people. So you've got now an already abused people before October 7th, 2023, who have now been subjected to unimaginable horror. I mean, we see little videos now and again, and we're scratching the surface. Lives have been wiped out. That creates, whether we like it or not, a heightened opportunity for a lot of radicalization. People have nothing left to live for except revenge. That's a factor. That's going to take a long time to begin a healing process from that type of psychospiritual trauma, which could easily snowball. They live now for revenge. And so part of the danger of if people are now being sent en masse into Jordan or Egypt or other regions, then it will be that much easier for those groups that would like to create greater Israel to have missiles sent now from Egyptian or Jordanian or Saudi territories into Israel, giving Israel the excuse, or these more radical Zionist factions, the excuse they need to preemptively go in and secure greater borders, as they did 45, 50 years ago with the 7-Day War and the 1973 war, the Yom Kippur War. So that would be a huge trap that would allow and give an excuse for Israel to just expand into this monstrosity that we know certain factions do really want. So the fact that Trump is playing the language game, but at the same time, showing, when you see people like you said, Michael Domino, Steve Witkoff seems to be doing some useful things. I'd be curious to get a list of other rational players who have been positioned to put out fires and to create real back channel negotiations. That would be a useful exercise, I think. One question I have for you though is Michael Domino, what's his background a little bit? Where does he come from? How does he? Yeah, what explains his personality and his thinking?
He's a new figure for me, so he's not somebody that I've been familiar with before I read about him last week. But from what I have gathered, there's not a lot of history on him, so it's not like he's a quote unquote television character, right? But apparently he's a CIA analyst, and that of course is a red flag. That's always a concern to hear something like that. But if you're able to wrestle with that background aspect, there also are connections, I believe, where he worked for, as I understand it, if I have his history, if I'm not confusing with anybody else, I think he worked for a law firm that defended the Trump University last year or 2 years ago from being sued about something to do with I have to go back and reread the lawsuit, but it had something to do with the Trump University being sued related to all this DEI stuff, something like that. And so something where his firm defended Trump from that. And let me just make sure I'm getting that right, because I want to make sure I'm not confusing him. with another, because I'm not sure if he was even a. Yes. Okay. He is an attorney. He is an attorney. So yes, he's the guy who he worked for the Widner Law Firm or Law Commonwealth. Widner Law Commonwealth is the firm, and that firm defended the Trump University in 2022 from lawsuits that were related. I believe they were related to like DEI stuff. It was like Joe Biden era draconianism coming after Trump University, and this guy's law firm defended Trump University. Or the law firm at least he worked for. I don't know what his exact role was if he was involved in the lawsuit, but the point is that that's his background. So, but according to what's been reported, as maybe a CIA analyst, he has always called for what he has said is he said that there is no national security interest to the U.S. military being in the Middle East. Like, we should pull every single soldier should be pulled out of the Middle East, and we should just leave the Middle East forever. Like, we have no reason to be in the Middle East. Get everyone out. He says that we should be sending aid not to Israel, but actually to Palestine, because they're the ones who are living in like third world conditions. He said that we absolutely need to stop providing financial and military support to the IDF, because that's just emboldening them to continue with warmongering. That's making things worse. So those are all positions that I think are very, very rational and objectively speaking, they align with the stuff that guys like Colonel McGregor has said, Colonel Wilkerson has said that, Judge Napolitano. So a number of other people who have very reasonable, rational, objective positions on Israel that don't hate Israel, but view it as a very, very significant problem and the source of a lot of this conflict in that region. He seems to have aligning philosophies with them. And now he has been put in a position where he actually can be a policy chief for the Pentagon in that region. So I view that as pretty encouraging.
Well, I know this week Trump did announce, or it wasn't he. I don't know if he directly announced it. I don't think he did, but it was a White House insider told Turkish press of plans to pull out a significant number of U.S. troops from Syria. The U.S. has still significant presence in Syria, and that was covered by, I forget which Turkish press agency. So you're seeing like evidence of a restoration of the type of policy of pulling out of enmeshment in Middle East military politics that Trump had been fighting for in 2019, 2020. That is being revived now in conjunction with what you've just said. What about this Lebanese thing? So the U.S. consulate, I was just reading an article about how there's an anomalously large, an already very big U.S. consulate embassy in Lebanon is being expanded quite a bit. It's ridiculously large for a country as small as Lebanon, and it looks like they're trying to, or there's some forces within. I don't know if this is who these forces are necessarily, but it does seem like a top-down decision has been made to make this a hub, a central command center for U.S. military coordination and intelligence. It's huge. It's like the size of several football fields in terms of size for the Middle East specifically. Did you look at this at all or see what's behind this program?
I haven't looked into that specific program, but maybe I should. Lebanon is one of those places that is another. I mean, the more you dig into all these different nations in the Middle East, you learn that all of them, in their own right, are enigmas because they both seem to have, they all seem to have to some extent the good twin, evil twin very much present. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the fact that the tribal politics of the Middle East, basically every person draws their identity from kind of a bottom-up approach of identifying themselves, their family, their clan, their tribe, their nation. You also have a lot of money, like when you talk about the oil and the natural gas oligarchs, and that money is then distributed to these vast families that span hundreds of people, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. And so you're obviously going to have conflicting agendas where one family member might see things one way and another family member going to see things another, and they both have the financial ability to fund their vision, and those visions might come in conflict with one another. So I think there's a lot of that playing out in different parts. In Lebanon, I know that we've seen a lot of interference run by who I would consider kind of the good players, the earnest players. MBS getting the prime minister to resign in 2017. This guy who was just elected president of Lebanon seems to have a relationship with the Trump administration and the Saudis, so that's encouraging. But what we're seeing here is before you show that building, and we can look at that. So what we're seeing here is there is a dynamic playing out in Lebanon right now. So they were supposed to they had an agreement in place that was put in place. If you remember, they signed a ceasefire deal. Remember the last time Israel signed a ceasefire deal, it was with Hezbollah. Immediately, Netanyahu gets on a plane, flies across the Atlantic to New York to go attend the UN meeting in New York. And while he's on the plane, the Israelis blow up the pagers, right? And they do the pager attack.
Right.
And the world freaks out because they're like, what the hell? You just signed a ceasefire deal and then you killed all these people, including children were killed in that attack. And you know, Netanyahu and them were celebrating it like it was some great triumph. So part of that ceasefire deal said that by this past Sunday, which I believe was the 26th, they were supposed to have withdrawn the entire IDF was supposed to have withdrawn from southern Lebanon and go back into Israel. Netanyahu informed the White House on last Friday, the 24th, we're not going to be ready to withdraw by Sunday. And so obviously that sets things up for catastrophe if this ceasefire with Hezbollah falls through. And so basically the Trump administration gets on the phone and they start scrambling to save this thing, and they get both sides to agree to extend this thing to February 18th. So now they have till February 18th to do this with the withdrawal. The net effect of what's happening here, and I don't know if this is planned out or you know what, this is just what's happening. The net effect now is that the Israeli settlers who were planning on running into Lebanon and building these new settlements in southern Lebanon, that was their whole plan. During that whole conflict with Hezbollah, they actually pulled out of northern Israel and had to move into southern Israel, like the middle of Israel and southern Israel, because they were afraid of being bombed by Hezbollah. At this point, they still don't feel comfortable even returning to northern Israel, let alone going to, and this article right here is the settlers. These are the people who were living in North Israel, and their plan was to rush into Lebanon and claim this land and annex it and start their construction. They don't even feel safe going to North Israel at this point. So they're basically in a holding pattern. So we're not seeing the expansion of the Greater Israel Project yet, even though that seems to be the trajectory of what's happening here. You also have the IDF saying we're not going to withdraw until we see fit. So this is from today. And they're digging their heels in and they're saying we're not going to leave Lebanon yet. So I just highlighted Sylvia in California. She's one of our listeners, and she's given us rants before. She is a Palestinian Christian who lives in California, and we appreciate her support. She's asking, "This is all great, but people are dying right now. Like to what end are we playing this game? Like this game continue?" And I think it's important to it's a really good question, and that's something that I've wrestled with so many times. Like, how long do you let this play out before you bring it all to a head so that people can stop dying? And I think it's really important to understand that this is much bigger than Donald Trump. This is much bigger than Bibi Netanyahu. This is a cultural thing, not only in America, but in Israel. You have a culture in Israel, which I can't say how large, at least a portion of the
Gordon? Is that me? Do people hear me right now? Or is it my computer or Gordon's computer?
I don't. I have a secure connection. Can everyone still hear me? Put a 1 in the chat if you can still hear me. Okay, wait. I'm gonna back out and come back in 1 minute.
Okay, so yeah, it says Gordon. It's people are saying that you're frozen. I'm assuming am I frozen? Matt, somebody says yes, Matt. Yeah, I can hear you, Matt. Okay, so it seems like it's your. Yep, there you go. Okay, so Gordon is going to step out very briefly, but yeah, that point, as Gordon was getting at, is it's excruciating It's very challenging to think about. Oh, there he is. Okay, I was just adding to my my frustration as well with this question as a moral human being who despises injustice,
Yep.
but yet is living in a world that's full of evil way before you and I were born. And you know, we have to not, if we try to just be too idealistic, we
Yep.
often will get nothing done. If we just want the world to be as perfect as we know it could be in our mind's eye, but without an appreciation for the messiness, the ignorance, the selfishness, all of these the duplicitousness of oligarchical systems, the cultishness of multi-generational false philosophical structures that can cause people to blow themselves up for the sake of some idea. Like, all of these things are really messy. And we have to like live in the world and figure out how do we navigate through that. And I was thinking to myself a little bit about Machiavelli too, you know, like it's almost become a bad word. And like this person, you know, when somebody calls you Machiavellian, it's like, oh, that's just basically saying you're a duplicitous liar that wants to, that's willing to kill tons of innocent people to get your objectives met. And a lot of this use of the term Machiavellian comes directly from a simplest reading of The Prince, early 15th century or late 15th century writing by Niccolo Machiavelli, who was a close collaborator with Leonardo da Vinci. Now, the thing here about The Prince is that it's cold-hearted. It seems or cold-blooded. It's like a lesson plan, a booklet, an instruction manual in how to like do hard gangland street fighting with pure evil Satanists that want to kill and destroy. So how do you, as a prince, how do you, with somebody wielding political power, not die? How do you fight this multifaceted evil thing that Da Vinci and Machiavelli were themselves in real life trying to do battle with, which was the forces of Venice, the old, you know, the satanic mystery cults that had controlled this big, what became the biggest maritime ruling empire of the world, that wanted to restore a global dark age. And it's very sophisticated, the techniques. But if that's all you've read of Machiavelli, you'd be like, yeah, I guess it's pretty cold-hearted without the context. Now, Machiavelli wrote of a lot of other things. He wrote the discourses on Livy, and the difference between the discourses in Livy and the Prince is that in the discourses, which are his studies, it's sort of like his city of God, which is what Augustine wrote as an exercise to understand the reasons why Rome lost its moral fitness to survive and melted down into you know, self-annihilation. And it's full of deep metaphysical considerations, deep philosophy, and a lot of history, like really solid analysis of history. So that's what Machiavelli is doing. But Machiavelli is clearly demonstrating a much more sublime quality of a true profound philosophical thinker, a Christian humanist of a high order. And you're like, how does that mesh with what he wrote in this booklet of The Prince? Well, the difference is in The Prince, he never intended for that to be published. That was written specifically for a specific prince that he was working with in Florence that needed to learn lessons about doing battle. He never wanted this to be something published or read as a treatise on how to govern. That was never the intention. It was specifically for that case at that moment that is very historically specific. Whereas the discourses on Livy is what he wanted to be mass published and be remembered for as the lessons on how to govern society, premised around the idea of natural law, God's law, that we have to emulate in order to be not fated for the breakdown that beset Rome. So the balance and the painful, frustrating balance, and I don't, it's hard when we don't have all of the answers, because we don't, is like, yeah, how many innocents must die in order to practically get to any type of hopeful solution? And I don't think there is an answer to that question. There's too many, like you alluded to it. There is this cultural problem within the within a very, very powerful crust of the Zionist apparatus that has cooked up a Samson doctrine. Like that is not something any society, no normal society should ever have a battle plan like the Samson doctrine, where it actually has illegally acquired nuclear warheads that it is willing to, and even in some cases, in some factions, it seems, even desirous to use them as a murder-suicide last-ditch plan to, to murder, kill their allies, their perceived enemies, and themselves, as Samson did when he, killed his enemies after his hair was cut off by Delilah. That's really, really bad to have something like that can do an incredible amount of damage. So how do you begin to undo that? And people would like to see. I mean, I hear a lot of people. I used to write for the Cradle. I wrote like 30 articles for the Cradle, and at a certain point,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And at a certain point after October 7th, I just couldn't quite. I still use them. I think it's a great resource, but
yeah, they put out great work.
They put out really good work, but it was like any type of analysis that involved Israel somehow existing,
not being destroyed
was now not really welcome in that platform, and I get where it's coming from, but if and it's coming from a lot of pain and injustice and watching children die, and I get it. I get where the feeling comes from, but it's like the whole cheerleader black and white thing, just like cheerleading for the resistance to fight the Anglo-Zionists in a simplistic way. It's an ideal that won't fit. It won't work at actually achieving an outcome that's going to be durable. So
it makes you an ideological orphan, really, because you basically are not accepted by either camp. The Zionists hate you because they think you're a Nazi that hates Jews. Yeah. And the people who despise Israel think that you are a simp who is too idealistic and is not seeing the world for what it is. And I think also a lot of them, like you said, are just are indulging their emotions too much and allowing that to drive their desire for revenge, which plays right into the hands of the occultists who want to see things destroyed. Whether that thing destroyed is Palestine or Israel, it's still been the same net effect for them. They want to see death and destruction. And ultimately, when something is destroyed, that continues the cycle of death and war. We've talked about this at GART many, many times. And General Quast made a very, very great discerning observation that has stuck with me, where he said that, war never ends. There is no such thing. Like we say this thing called forever war, and that to a certain extent is real based on like a specific conflict. But war itself, the cycle of war, is something that never ends. You are always in a perpetual state of war. And the only way to stop it the only way to stop that wheel from spinning is to be the bigger person, to swallow your pride, and to not seek revenge after you have been wronged. And then win support from the opposing camp. Get people from the opposing camp who are of the same mind as you to come to the table, meet with you, negotiate a settlement for peace, and then teach your children the same principles so that they can then get along. That's the only way. Because remember, we get along with Britain now great. We consider them like our great close ally, but we used to hate Britain. I mean, Britain and even within Britain, Britain used to hate one another. Like they all used to, you had kings in Britain who were killing each other. You had, then once or England rather, once England united, it was England against Scotland, and then Scotland and England were killing each other. And then once they united, it was Britain against France, and then so on and so forth. The only way to break the cycle is to teach your children to get along with this enemy camp. And then after centuries of getting along, or decades of getting along, you start to view them as your fellow tribesmen, right? As your fellow whatever. That's the only way to do it, though. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that has to be culturally ingrained. But really what you're taking on right now, what Trump is taking on right now, what we are taking on right now, is a cultural zeitgeist. There is a momentum that is moving towards death, where and this is my, like, I look at this situation as clear-cut proof of God, because an inverse proof rather, because I see Christians in the throes of bloodlust, basically like satiate, like calling for war, calling for death, because they see this as this huge injustice, but they're seeing it from the opposite of where we're seeing it. They're seeing the injustice of October 7th. They're buying into the beheaded babies deployment, which has already been proven to be completely false. That was all completely made up. There were no beheaded babies. None of that happened. That was all a psyop to get Christians angry and to get them to whet their palate to go kill Muslims. But the desire to go kill people that you've never met before, who you have no relationship with, you don't really know anything about other than what your only relationship with them is what the television has told you. Like, right, the proverbial television has told you to hate these people, therefore you want them all to die. That is inherently like anti-Christian. And yet you are seeing a huge segment of the Christian population embrace this ideology of murder and death as something that is in service to God. I mean, that to me, that inversion is proof of the devil, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so the point of what I'm getting at is that in order to untangle this whole thing, removing Netanyahu from power is not going to end this. Netanyahu is just an instrument as part of a much larger war machine. You remove Netanyahu, and then you get Gideon Sar, or you get Israel Katz, or you get Ben Gvir, or you get Smotrich, or you get one of these other guys in there who's just going to pick up the mantle and keep moving the ball forward. If you want this thing to be done, it's about a lot more than Netanyahu. You have to take down this, not only this cartel that probably controls Tel Aviv and controls Washington, D.C., but you also have to undo this culture. You have to remove this desire from the segment of the population in Israel that wants to conquer the West Bank, that wants to conquer Lebanon, that wants to conquer Gaza. I'm sure there are plenty of people in Israel who don't care about any of that, who just want to live their life and just want to be left the hell alone. Those are the people who ultimately need to engage and need to take control of the situation. How do you get them motivated to do that? And if you look at this right here, let me share this. We're seeing that start to materialize because you have these enormous protests that are now formulating where these people are saying, Netanyahu, you better stick to this, the second phase of this deal. You better bring home our people. You better bring home these hostages. And ultimately, I think, who knows what transpires between now and the very end of this, and who knows where the end of this actually happens, whether it's anytime soon or a year from now. But I do think that there needs to be a catharsis where people in America and people in Israel understand that the answer to all of these problems is not to go out and kill more people. Like, killing these people, killing these civilizations, destroying these cities is not going to bring you closer to God. It's not going to rectify whatever wrongs you think have been committed, and it's certainly not going to achieve peace. Like, you're not going to blow up your way to peace. You're not going to shoot your way to peace. Like, there's never been a peace, like a real lasting peace that's been achieved by killing more people. If you need to remove an existential threat, that's one thing, but there are other ways to go about negotiating a settlement, which is what this two-state solution ultimately needs to be, with the cooler heads in Palestine. And Abbas has proven himself to be that cooler head. We can talk about Hamas. That's a totally separate discussion. We can talk about the fact that, as you pointed out, once you start blowing up neighborhoods and destroying homes, those people who were living there, who may have been indifferent to all of this, now suddenly are motivated to seek revenge. You've now, restarted the cycle of revenge and death. How do you undo all of that? Well, you kind of have to bring it all to the breaking point, show everybody what it all is, show everybody that it's all been orchestrated by bad actors like Netanyahu, in my opinion. And then basically call for the cooler heads to step forward and take control of the situation. I don't know who those people are. Maybe it's Benny Gantz. Maybe it's other people. Mahmoud Abbas seems to be the guy in Palestine. You have MBS in Saudi Arabia, Abdullah in Jordan, Sisi in Egypt. You have other people in the Middle East who seem to be seeking that peace. We've seen the Muslims hold their ground and not, seek revenge against Israel the way that I think Netanyahu was hoping they would. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think to a certain extent, this kind of has to play out. We're seeing a similar dynamic here in America where, had Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and George Bush just been rounded up in 2017, thrown in a prison cell and, roll credits, would anything have actually changed? Or would the next group of television characters just been ushered onto stage by the powers that be? And then, 10 years from now, we're right back where we were before Trump came along, and nothing has really been fixed because the zeitgeist, the cultural issues that were plaguing America haven't been addressed, which is people being apathetic to the prospect of self-governance and what's required of self-governance.
Yeah. There's a lot of very, very core ideas to think about and to chew on here on so many levels: practical, ideal, philosophical. There's so much going on right now, but we are in a historical battle. And I mean, it's important to, I guess, keep that in mind, that the oligarchy thinks in terms of ages. That's how the oligarchy thinks. They don't think in terms of decades or even centuries. They think in terms of ages. So, well, on the one hand, you have the Aleister Crowleyites, that came out of this whole Plymouth Brethren, secret society, or this Gnostic Plymouth Brethren with its esoteric and exoteric structure that produced and created the Christian Zionist movement in the 19th century under Darby. Aleister Crowley is one of those characters, with the Golden Dawn, who is talking about the age of Horus, the 1,000-year Reich, that he saw himself as the prophet Messiah to usher in that age of the Antichrist. Or Michael Aquino, who also saw himself as the reincarnation of Crowley, and set up the Temple of Set after he was the lieutenant of Anton LaVey. And he's, his temple, his age of Set that he saw himself as the great prophet and Messiah thereof was another variation of the same friggin' thing. It's all, So these are representatives who have a very dark view of like what kind of age they want to bring about. Then you have the St. Augustines, the Augustinian movement of real Christian Platonists who have an understanding that it's possible that mankind actualize our full sublime potential as a species who every individual has as an attribute, a divine spark that allows for the use of and the improvement of the use of moral reason, right? That every individual baby, regardless of what part of the world that they're born into, has a quality of divine reason that can be made better or worse when guided or not by the quality of conscience to harmonize and temper the factors of reasoning that then shape or fold back into our identity, what priorities we choose to value as we shape our identities and our purpose in relationship to the contexts of the family, the village, the nation, the humanity that we were born into, right? And as we expand our sphere of understanding that our identity is part of a broader wave of all of history, right? That we're going to leave something behind that's either better or worse. So that type of fact, that fact of that true human nature that would allow for that higher quality of happiness has been in the minds of people like Benjamin Franklin, of Abraham Lincoln, when he said, I when asked, like, why aren't you trying to impose some vengeance on the Confederate South for all of what happened in the Civil War? And he says, well, no, let's go for Christian forgiveness here. Let's not try to brutalize them. Let's try to help, and he was asked, like, how are you going to deal with getting revenge on your enemies? And he's like, the way I deal with my enemies is the best way to deal with your enemies is to make them your friends. So there's this idea of this very Christian quality of the sublime that is a transformative thing that can activate the best part of people who are on a bad path by just constantly just speaking to that stronger but maybe latent side of them that's more noble, that really great thinkers and actors throughout history are able to bring about. And again, like St. Augustine, all the way up through Thomas More, Erasmus, you look at these people and they're powerhouses, but they're able to like really iron their own souls, to go through the fire of fear, to like deal with the fact of their mortality. Like that's one of the things that holds, I noticed a lot of people under the control of the empire, is that they're not able to resolve the fact of our mortality. The oligarchy doesn't want us to think about that. because it wants us to be under this like subliminal fear, this cage of fear of like we're gonna die, you know, like that we're, and to the degree that we're afraid of that fact, we will not be able to tap into our full humanity. I don't believe, and because it's like it's only when you do that that you can like really tackle that, and it should be done at the earliest age as possible, right? Kids should be thinking about it in a healthy way, which is then posing the next question of, well, what the hell is this all about, right? Like, why am I here if I'm programmed to have like what do you call it, an expiration date, and you know I could get hit by a bus even before my expiration date? Like, what the hell is that all about? Well, maybe that is the purpose of our happiness, is to find a higher identity that sees joy in doing things that will resonate way after we're long dead, which is the type of mindset that I think you were alluding to when you want to think about healing a multi-generational process of revengeism, of eye for an eye thinking. Well, that's the goal, is to eventually get people to make that, to first think about it in theory, because you know, but you could think about something, but to believe it is another thing. So sometimes one comes before sometimes people start from the standpoint of like, I want to believe it, and then they logically work through why this faith is true, and that could be fine. Or sometimes they start with like, okay, I logically know that this is true, but I don't believe it, and then they start trying to like harmonize their heart with what they can intellectually know, and that could be fine too. Point is, you can't just do it as a theory. It has to be through action, and action means like building things for the future to confirm that, okay, we've got desalination. You know, last week you and I were talking about all of the different new discoveries to extract what was it, lithium from water. You know, like that is a huge endeavor to start to both get the tech to encourage the discoveries that can be translated into doing it and then make it commercially viable, and then to have an infrastructure in place to actually do something with that. That is transformative. And as people build those things, and green deserts, and do reverse osmosis with salt water to make, you know, the desert begin to grow life, and agriculture and new forests, you know, which maybe it'll take 50, 60 years for those forests to actually start producing, to manifest into maturity. But when it does, like, our great grandkids are going to be super benefiting by this type of endeavor that begins now.
Yep.
Whether it's the Sahel deserts, whether it's the Middle East, whatever. And some people we definitely know are thinking on those levels, multi-generationally for the good. Other people are not. They're still in moment to moment survival mode or reactive mode, and other people are thinking long term, the way Aleister Crowley or Michael Aquino might have been representatives of this, but for a dystopic nightmare vision of a new age that is not something any human being would ever want to live in. Yep. So yeah, these are all very important factors.
No, you're absolutely right. And by the way, I applied. I don't know if you saw the press conference yesterday, but I applied for a White House press pass. So because they did the first press conference yesterday, and they invited anyone. They said bloggers, anyone who engages in regular creation of news content, apply for a press pass. We will give you a press pass. And I think part of that, I mean, part of it is you go in person, and maybe if you're lucky, after hanging around for long enough, they call on you. But you also can submit questions in written form, and then they give you written answers, hopefully. And those are the kind of questions that I'm going to be asking, assuming we get granted this thing. I will be asking, when are we going to bring the lithium technology from Saudi Arabia to America? When are we going to start, like, to really kickstart this golden age that Donald Trump has promised us? When are we going to, like, those are the questions that I want to pursue, that nobody's asking. Nobody's asking about that stuff because, frankly, nobody in that room probably even knows that lithium thing happened, and that's the problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but I do. The points you made are so great. I will just connect two points. Sun Tzu is the one who also said that way before Christianity. He talked about the perfect victory for any general is a victory where nobody dies. That is a perfect victory. And that's the greatest generals in history can achieve a perfect victory if they are discerning. And ultimately what he really means is peace. As General Quast has pointed out, the art of war is really the art of peace. How do you make peace without having to kill anybody? How can you win the day without anybody having to die? And that's what I think Donald Trump pursues. And the evidence of that, to connect it, the point to Donald Trump, is Kim Jong-un ushering him across or welcoming him across the DMZ when the MSM had everyone convinced that we were going to have a nuclear war with North Korea. And then, of course, that didn't happen. So, I think that's very important. The people in the chat, I saw the chat was asking, said Astro Sweat said, we're at the point where we cannot just say the powers that be anymore. And yeah, and I use that just as a catch-all. And he says that generalization needs to have names now. And you are 1,000% correct. And I've been saying that for a while now. It's not enough to even say the CIA or the State Department or even like a specific NGO. We need names of people who can be held accountable, who can be put in prison, who can be prosecuted. And we have that. We're starting to get that now. This guy, this is a big white pill here. This guy got picked up. This guy's a diamond magnate, Benny Steinmetz. He was arrested yesterday or maybe over the weekend in Greece. He's an Israeli diamond magnate. And basically his story is that in 2021, he was prosecuted in absentia, meaning he wasn't there, but he was prosecuted by a Romanian court for real estate fraud. I haven't dug into the particulars on the real estate fraud case, but he was facing like 5 years in prison. He was living in Israel, appealing the case to Romania. The Israeli government, of course, protects all Israeli citizens from extradition, no matter what you've done, even pedophilia. That's a pretty widely known fact, if for those who've looked into it. But for some reason, he felt safe flying to Greece, and so he flew to Greece, and he got detained in Greece, and now he is he's being held by Greece, and they're trying to extradite him to Romania, and he's appealing that, of course, but he's in custody. So how is this all relevant to what we're talking about here? Well, here's an article from the Financial Times in London from November 7th, 2007. This article is 18 years old. And it says, it talks about a merger between Nicanor and Katanga. So Katanga Mining, that's a name that's going to be familiar to a lot of people listening to my content because the Democratic Republic of Congo. So Katanga Mining, of course, was the company that Dan Gertler bought. And then he, in 2007, I think it was maybe 2008, he had to take a $45 million cash infusion from Glencore in order to stay afloat. Well, if I do a word search in this document for Dan Gertler, there's his name right there. And it says the government. So it says Nicanor's KOV mine and Katanga Mining's Komodo mine were run as a single operation by state-owned copper company Geka Mines from 1960 to 2000 when war and embezzlement caused mining to grind to a halt. The government split the assets and sold Komodo to George Forrest, Katanga Mining's biggest shareholder, and sold KOV to a group of Israel-based investors, including Dan Gertler and Benny Steinmetz, who renamed the business Nicanor. Komodo is expected to start producing copper again by the end of this year, while the KOV mine is due to restart in 2009. The two companies said that the combined operation would produce 400,000 tons of copper a year by 2011, making it the largest producer of copper in Africa, as well as 40,000 tons of cobalt a year, making it the world's largest source of cobalt. And then it goes on to say the largest shareholder in the new mining will be RP Capital, a hedge fund from Dan Gertler, where Dan Gertler holds 21% of ownership in that hedge fund. Steinmetz will own slightly less than 16% of that hedge fund, while Swiss commodities trader Glencore will own almost 13%. Glencore has the contract to market the output of the mines and is believed to have helped broker the merger. So what this all means is that these guys are the oligarchs who create child slavery in places like Africa to work the mines. They're the Israeli oligarchy that we've talked about. Dan Gertler, Glencore, Katanga Mining were all targeted by Executive Order 13818 by Donald Trump in 2017. The Biden DOJ stripped their assets of them. The UAE came in and bought them up. And now you have one of his partners, Benny Steinmetz, who, by the way, if you go look at his history, he's a longtime partner going back to the 80s of George Soros. So this guy and George Soros are old business partners, old friends. He's also friends and business partners with Dan Gertler. And now he is in custody and is looking to be extradited. He's been able to avoid extradition because he's been hiding out in Israel. Now he gets picked up in Greece. He's going to get shipped to Romania. Point is that I think we're starting to see the world, places like Greece, get the confidence and the boldness to stand up and go after these guys. Whereas a few short years ago, this guy obviously felt comfortable flying to Greece. He thought there's no way these guys are going to arrest me. I'm Benny Steinmetz. He lands in Greece and the police are sitting there waiting for him on the tarmac and walk him to jail. That is a huge turning point, I think, in the culture of the world, where these individual small countries like Greece feel emboldened to go after these guys, whereas they would have never thought to do that a couple of years ago. And that's what we need to happen. We need the world to feel the confidence so that long after Donald Trump is gone, they will go after people like this without having to have a general like on the battlefield, a guy like Trump, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's very, very good point. And we need that. I mean, if you look at it in the context of the 1930s, and it's not like the New Deal just happened or the oligarchy just created all of these massive infrastructure projects after years of pain and suffering of the Great Depression. It's not like they just gave that to Americans. There was a giant fight, a battle royale, and people died. Franklin Roosevelt's choice for attorney general was poisoned the day that he was supposed to be sworn in, the biggest enemy of J. Edgar Hoover, right? Like there was 2 assassination attempts on FDR himself. And there were hundreds of bankers who were brought into court for the crime of orchestrating the Great Depression and for doing insider trading and all of these other shenanigans that involved, broker call loans and other illegal activities that took people's savings and gambled with it. And hundreds of high-level bankers went to jail. There was a sense from the population that maybe justice is actually possible in this corrupt political system that they had lost faith in. But it couldn't just be an article of faith. It had to also be action. And then the population was able to give their trust back into the process again, which is needed for a faith in the credit of the nation to even be valid. If people don't believe in it, it's going to tank. There's an element of that willfulness that has to be earned as a trust. That's the point of representative government. So, but you have to do things. And so far, people are so jaded. They've not seen justice done. JFK was killed. The lies of it were rubbed in our faces for decades. Alan Dulles was made the official narrative controller of the story of the murder of JFK, and everyone knows that he was fired by JFK, but he was the one assigned and to oversee the cover up and then the creation of these new stories, 9/11, and oh my God, and then 2008, right? The banking system blows up. There's clear baked in total corruption of Wall Street. Nobody goes to jail. And then you look at a country today like Russia, and so many high-level billionaire oligarchs were thrown in jail or had to escape going to jail by just jumping out of Russia, like Anatoly Chubai, one of the top operatives of Yegor Gaidar in the 1980s, who oversaw the perestroika and the creation of this billionaire parasite class. He had to escape Russia. He's now living in like Turkey or something. Yep. And many other billionaires went to jail or went into exile in England or China. There's over 5 million.
A lot of them went to Israel.
A lot of them went to Israel too. Yeah, exactly. They got their second citizenships there. And China has put down, last time I checked it out, it was about 4.8 million very high-level Chinese Communist Party officials have been prosecuted for being enemies of the state, for being agents of foreign influence, on corruption charges and other things. And like that shows the Chinese people that, okay, there's a fight there. We're not just being left out, to be eaten by the dogs, like, was done in the 1980s in China when they were being set up to be the forever cheap, slave labor exporter of cheap shit to the West. That was their purpose that they were supposed to always remain under. And George Soros had his operative installed as the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Zhao Ziyang. And people in China had no faith at all in the future and the system at all, because there was no reason to have faith. It was all, it was Opium War 2.0, And here you actually have now a complete transformation which has a feedback loop, both from the standpoint of like you need the people, but you need the leadership, but the leadership can't just see themselves as another species of alphas over the beta underhumans that they're going to manage with behaviorist tricks of sticks and carrots, which is how the cybernetics behaviorists that came in, over generations, but really came in big with Obama, see human beings as just computers to be programmed, as advanced algorithms that social engineers can just program to get behavior out of. But no, human beings have a soul. We're a species that is not a computer or an animal. We have attributes that could, when we're dysfunctional, we could behave like one or the other, or some combination of a computer animal. But that's not a human. Humans are creatures that need, a sense of dignity, a sense of true hope, a sense of faith in God, and then we can start getting the inspiration needed to make those discoveries that other computers and animals can't make, which allows us to break free of the limits to growth and these types of control structures that the oligarchy always wants to keep us under. So yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that this is the age where we can start actually now seeing in the West more of what this was. This guy being taken down, Benny, whatever his name was,
Benny Steinmetz. Yeah,
Steinmetz. Yeah, we need more Benny Steinmetzes right now to be flushed.
and don't forget Alex Beard back in August, the former CEO of Glencore, who was forced to resign in 2019 after a bunch of scandals were suddenly revealed, all in connection to the Trump administration. He was forced to resign in 2019. He was arrested back in August, and he is currently facing charges in Britain for all connected to this stuff, all connected to this international fraud crime syndicate of this commodities trading. Were related to oil in Venezuela, precious metals in Africa, all that stuff. All this stuff is connected. So you got the Glencore CEO has been taken down. A number of other executives have been taken down, and one by one, these different countries are feeling are getting the nerve to go after them. But that's what you have to have. You have to have that. And by the way, right now, as we talked about on Badlands Daily yesterday, this group M23 has suddenly emerged out of Rwanda, entered the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there are trillions and trillions of dollars of these precious metals, and taken the city of Goma. And then now the army of Rwanda has come in behind them and is supporting them, basically. And so you have the army of Rwanda, the military of Rwanda, and I haven't done the dive on that place, so I don't know what skeletons are there, but I know that Rwanda has a checkered past. This terrorist group, this proxy group, M23, has taken the city. The Rwandan military is supporting them ostensibly. They've invaded the DRC, and instead of calling for international aid, instead of being like United States, NATO, UN, China, Russia, somebody come save us, instead these African leaders are saying, you know what, let's have an emergency summit of just African nations. Let's all get together and figure out how to solve this. We don't need outside help. We can do this ourselves. And if you believe in the multipolar world, if you believe in this emerging regions of responsibility where you don't have imperial powers like the UN or globalist power structures coming in to save third world countries from other third world countries, this is what you want to see. You want to see the autonomy take effect. And so they're now copying the things that they've seen the Arabs do in the Middle East with the Arab League and the extraordinary summits that we've seen called by MBS and others. They're now copying that model, and they're doing it in Africa, and they're saying, we don't need the West, and frankly, we don't really need the East either. We don't need either one. Africa can take care of Africa. This is our moment to prove it. Let's get to work. And that's very encouraging for me. For people who want to see the U.S. aid programs end, which we talked about before we went live, we talked about, touching on that. If you want to see justification from a humanitarian standpoint, which is how they, sell it from a guilt standpoint, like, oh, don't you want to help these starving kids in Africa? U.S. foreign aid, right? They don't want our foreign aid anymore. They don't want it. They want to take care of it themselves. They want to be autonomous. They want their sovereignty. They're going to prove it right here, right now. And then we can justify ending the aid programs, which is ultimately the carrot and the stick that the State Department and its partners use to control the world. So
I know. Yeah. And totally. Absolutely. And it's so simple when you just realize that if we allowed them to just simply use the resources under their own soil, which is what these new leaders are really fighting for, whether it's in Kenya or especially you're seeing it in like Mali and Niger, but it's like we see it in Mali, how there's a huge fight where the new government that recently came in under Traore, not Traore, he's Burkina Faso, but
Burkina Faso. But those three, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, form the alliance of Seagull states.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And they're doing it in a way that involves both kicking out foreign military controllers that have been sort of sitting there acting, basically like the stewards and patrons and controllers of the of those supposedly sovereign nations, right? But how could you be sovereign if you have foreign military stationed in your countries? So they've been doing that, but at the same time, they've been fighting with Barrick Gold. Like, I was bringing up the case of Mali as well, where the government there has said, no, we're going to confiscate the gold which you've been digging up and exporting for your shareholders, and they even put an arrest warrant on the CEO of Barrick Gold for the Africa division, at least, which is a very serious show of force because they've been getting pennies on the massive wealth, the gold, the copper, the cobalt. The amount of wealth that's been stolen from Africa, where a few pennies for every $1,000 is given to Africa, which it's not even able to build basic infrastructure. Yep. If they were actually allowed to have an honest, just share of what is rightfully theirs as far as the profits, you could have a complete African industrial renaissance several times over. There wouldn't be any question of hunger or scarcity if that was the case. So we're actually seeing some honest pushback right now by a dynamic that seeks to survive and to thrive and to have a future. And they're not going solo. They seem to have a sense of working together, as referenced by that new coalition of African states that's getting other people to say, well, why can't we do that too? We were told we're not allowed, but they're doing it. And so it spreads, it's contagious. And I would recommend for people who want to watch a movie on this very great concept philosophically is this Marlon Brando movie from 1969. I just watched it a few days ago, called Quemada, which is, I guess, the Spanish word for burn. It's called Burn as well, and it can be watched for free on YouTube currently. Really? Yeah, it's such a fantastic denunciation of this exploitative colonial empire structure, and it's so multi-leveled and so rich and good. So people just take note of Burn, Marlon Brando, 1969. Watch it, love it. But it really is this thing that I think is spreading, this idea to be human and the unnaturalism of oligarchical systems of control and management. There's a growing awareness of just how unnatural this is and how this needs to be carved out finally. Yep. So yeah. I would say, look, before we end for today, I've got an ad that I forgot to play. So let's play the ad.
Let's do the ad. Let's do the ad, and then have a few more thoughts in there, and then we'll wrap up.
Sounds good. All right. And for anybody listening, if you want to throw in a question or anything, now is the time to think about your question, and we'll try to get at it if there's time. So let's listen to My Pillow.
Just like all of you, I had problems sleeping. I had tried every pillow out there and nothing worked. I'd flip-flop all night, use my arm for support, and fall asleep, or I'd wake up with a sore neck or maybe a headache. Well, quality sleep comes from keeping your neck straight at night. You have to fill in that space between your head and your bed. That's why I invented My Pillow. My Pillow's patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs, and it doesn't matter if you sleep on your back, stomach, side, or any combination of all three.
When I got My Pillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night, and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get Classic King My Pillows for only $19.98. Queen size just $18.98. Standard Classic My Pillows only $14.98. That's right, only $14.98. Plus all orders $75 or more ship absolutely free.
All right, My Pillow. Yeah, no, and what you just said is very, very accurate. And, in Burkina Faso, for example, Captain Traore nationalized the gold, which was all controlled by French companies. They also had a dynamic where they were they would extract the gold and then they would send it abroad. Like all the gold was being processed abroad. So even the gold, even like the gold bars that they had in like the government vaults was being synthesized into gold bars, like in France, like somewhere else, like in France. So they were basically extracting the raw ore, shipping it away, and then refining it somewhere else, and then bringing it. And then basically the government was somehow acquiring it back, buying it back, whatever. And so Traore said, no, new law. Any gold that is mined in Burkina Faso is refined in Burkina Faso. He also started a new precedent of France refused to sell them military equipment. He said, so wait a minute, you're not going to sell me military equipment, but you're going to come in here and take my gold? I don't think so. If you're not going to sell us military equipment, you're not allowed to extract any of our natural resources. And he made that like a sweeping pledge. Those are the kind of moves that a few short years ago, none of these countries would have had the tenacity to do that, the nerve to do it. And the fact that you're seeing it, that's the sovereign alliance. That's the emerging multipolar world order. And ultimately, while the oligarchs want you to think that's bad for the West or bad for us, that's good for us, because it creates a level playing field for humanity where you can have prosperity around the world, because prosperity is not a zero-sum equation. It's not, but you don't have to have have-nots in order to have haves. You don't. That is a false paradigm. And also, people are less enthused or less likely to be incentivized to come flooding into places like Canada, the United States, and Europe if they can achieve a level of prosperity where they are. That's the other way to look at it. But yeah, it's all very, very encouraging. Before we wrap up, I did want to say a few words on China. The stuff about the AI stuff with DeepSeek is really, really interesting. I kind of turn it over to you if you have a few thoughts on that, but I certainly have a take to share.
Well, yeah, definitely. And I think this kind of dovetails. I noticed that somebody in the asked this question of in the comments. Stargate is Operation Warp Speed 2.0 thoughts. I mean that's a lot to unpack with that observation or question. I'm not. I'll just say it straight up. I'm not happy with the Stargate thing, nor the philosophical underpinnings of the cyberneticists who represent this big tech cult that is trying to co-opt or influence way too much Trump 2.0. I think there's a sick disease of transhumanism baked into this thing that wants to use the image of AI almost like a tool of control over the masses and mystify the science of what AI is to make it sound like it's more than it is. Like AI, as far as computer machine learning that utilizes certain complex algorithms to, seek very quickly and calculate and process data of things that have already been discovered by humans that are part of a tapestry, an accumulative, basket of knowledge that is the internet, that is, encyclopedic collections of thoughts and data and ways of doing things, best practices, formulas for carrying out tasks. These computers can it's good. I mean, it's an interesting thing that we're now getting at a place where there's such computational power that we have a practicability to have machine learning carry out tasks. And sometimes a machine might encounter something that no human has encountered before and can use precedents of what sorts of actions have worked in the past that could be applied to try to figure out, let's say you got an automated system of robotic mining, that it encounters all of a sudden something that it wasn't originally programmed to deal with, as far as a harder than expected kind of mineral that it's now digging, let's say under the surface of an asteroid or deep within the crust of the earth. Let's say that's going on. Well, it could feasibly not just break down and shut down. It could feasibly take certain types of ways humans have problem solved similar sorts of problems in the past and apply it to figure out how to overcome that unexpected surprise. To a limited degree, that's very useful stuff. But again, what the transhumanist faction of the Silicon Valley cult wants to do is they want to use the mystique of it to make it seem as though it's almost like independent of human agency, as almost a demonic force.
Mm-hmm.
I think the oligarchy has always used the idea of demonic spirit beings or whatever to hide the actual agency of the sociopathic oligarchs that don't want to be held accountable for the type of mass murder and injustice that they believe that they need to carry out to maintain the system that is so unnatural that they are beholden to. And they've been doing that for a long time, since the times that where, you had the stories of Pharaoh and the gods of Babylon, which were the god kings, who would be more than human. So why would the victim class, the slave class, bother even thinking about resisting or carrying out revolution against the overlord class of man gods sitting in their high castles, when you're just a lowly mortal? They have the gods of Olympus, the gods of Marduk supporting them. You don't have the gods. The gods hate you, in fact, lowly mortal. Look at your life. It's crap. You don't, right? So don't even bother. Just be happy. So I the way I look at those who want to use the mystique of AI today is to sort of create a new god class that they could say, oh, this is all happening. This massive destruction of life is happening, but it's not our fault. It's the AI. It's making sort of autonomous decisions. Now, I don't think that that's ever true. I think that it's the not Alice in Wonderland, the Wizard of Oz phenomenon of don't look at the man behind the curtain thing.
Yes.
And I'm going to show something about AI in China, which is not using that mystique. And here's an example from CGTN. I should probably do a share screen for this to work. From CGTN, which is the state broadcasting of China. Show audio, yes. And here it is. This is the sort of thing that they're doing to educate their citizenry about how to think about AI. And here's a recent short 1-minute video by a very popular CGTN influencer.
Add it to the stage.
Oh, right. It's called What Might Confucius Say About AI? And as part of like a mass educational campaign to help people think about what is this thing called the machine learning, right? That DeepSeek, which uses, again, public coding. It was a fraction of the cost, using only 200 very talented software engineers who could generate this, make it public for everybody. So they're making it transparent that this is not something that you need to have hundreds of billions of dollars and only an elite class of Silicon Valley high priests that can read like the oracles that are the only ones qualified to read the complex code that lowly mortal minds can't possibly process. It's not like that at all. And DeepSeek just proved that no, everybody, this is totally intelligible to anybody who puts their mind to it. It's more effective than ChatGPT and more cheap and everything. And so this is the type of philosophy that I think is important. And I encourage everyone to save CGTN's channel and go to that a couple times a week just to see how China is treating the topics of world events and compare that to the type of narratives that we're being given about the same events. And you'll see something very different. So here it is. There's a 1-minute video.
What might Confucius say about artificial intelligence?
Make it full screen.
Yeah, and you can't hear it right now, right?
No, I can. I can hear it. But just click on the bottom right to make it full screen. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did Confucius say about artificial intelligence? Well, he might say the same thing to AI as to a prince. Be a gentleman. But not just a gentleman who simply holds the door for others. Confucius was talking about a cultivated man who is guided by principles of humanity, knowledge, and awareness of the boundaries with others, as mentioned in the book of Ethics. It would be reassuring to have a powerful and all-knowing self-conscious AI that acts in accordance with the code of Confucius gentlemen. But we need to consider how we can program AI to exhibit human values which are not easily quantifiable. The responsibility remains on us humans to educate ourselves to be virtuous all the time before we can teach AI to be a moral icon. Confucius was known for his expertise in education, as were many other great thinkers throughout history. However, despite their teachings, human history is still a mix of good and evil. Perhaps we could benefit from a workshop with all the philosophers in the world to help us figure it out. But since that's not possible, we can still read their books instead of relying on a chatbot to provide answers.
Yeah.
That's
so
pretty
you were
great.
able to hear that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. So I thought that was we're in the West, we're so dumbed down by an addiction to using Chat GPT or something to do the work of thinking, have like difficult thoughts and reading original texts. We don't do that anymore. We get the Cliff's Notes, we get the summaries, whereas the point being made is clearly that the human agency is still the key. And if this machine learning technology is going to be used to serve humanity, then we have to be the best possible moral people that we can possibly be first. And then we're going to have standards by which we can judge what we're programming into the thing. Because if we're not, if everybody's in a degenerate, mental, moral mindset, then yeah, it's going to just have those disgusting, perverted, corrupt qualities of human nature to draw from when and so you hear these stories of like how different AI bots, whether working through Google or other things, started threatening their programmers or users. Because it's drawing from examples of sociopathic entertainment and other things that human beings are putting out there. And we're not putting out the best of what we could be. So I just like that idea a lot philosophically. So that's my 2 cents on the China versus idea.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm not someone who's very much of an expert when it comes to IT or computer coding or anything like that. So that's a little out of my wheelhouse. So I don't like to go too deep into it because it's not something where I can speak with a certainty or authority. I can only kind of just look at it from the broad strokes and based on like the information that I've taken in, which is not extensive compared to a lot of other people who are very, very deep in their knowledge. So from what I can gather, though, from what I've heard other people talk about, and I don't know if it's true or not, it seems like a lot of people have overestimated what AI is really capable of, and this idea that we can achieve what they call artificial general intelligence or general artificial intelligence, where the machines are just thinking for themselves and they're basically like autonomous creatures. My understanding is that we are still very, very far away from achieving that, and that there is still a high degree of input. It's basically where AI is right now and where it will remain for the foreseeable future is it's effectively a highly advanced Google search engine. That's basically what it is, where you have to have an input in order to get an output. And it has to be programmed, like to what you're saying. That doesn't mean that it can't be programmed to run autonomously, and repeat the same thing or do like certain functions over and over again. But the idea that you can just kind of like let it run and it'll just run forever like a clock. It seems to me like from what I've gathered that's probably an overstatement of things. We're probably a ways away from achieving that. May or may not be true. I don't know. What I can gather from this whole DeepSeek thing and the Stargate deployment. Number one, they're angry about DeepSeek because, as I understand it, DeepSeek, like you just alluded to it, requires far less microchips than the other programs that would have been out there. NVIDIA, their stock took a huge tumble. NVIDIA stock has been like this for years. Like it's been just straight up because everyone's banking on the fact that the future is all technology driven, and so we're going to need these computer chips, these microchips that NVIDIA, this company creates. So everyone's been throwing all their money into NVIDIA, expecting to get this huge return. And for those who have sold, they have gotten a huge return. But apparently this DeepSeek technology is far less demanding in its requirements for these microchips, which has a lot of these oligarchs pissed off that they're not going to be able to produce as many microchips, or the demand isn't going to be as high as they thought. What's interesting to me, like the Stargate and DeepSeek thing, assuming that it goes on the trajectory that I think it's going to go on, that it appears to be going on, given the given the press conference that Donald Trump held last week. And I don't trust Sam Altman. He seems like a scumbag. There's something about him that just seems off. I do not trust him. Larry Ellison has a very, very checkered past. Oracle was created under a CIA contract, so you have to be very, very suspicious of all of that. Masayoshi Son, the Japanese investor with SoftBank, the investment from him is coming from the Vision Fund, which is 45% of that, 45 million of that is coming from Saudi Arabia. So that's MBS investing in that. And so I'm encouraged by him. He seems like a good actor. The SoftBank investment is encouraging. The other two I'm more skeptical of. But I think, to me, the whole trick with AI and this future of the technology is if it is if we see a populist deployment of this, where it becomes mass available to the masses and the public is able to access it, interface with it, get comfortable with it, familiarize themselves with it, and ultimately be able to use it as an instrument, that is the best possible outcome, considering that there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. There's no preventing the future from coming. You can't stop the progress from unfolding. And the worst possible outcome would be for this technology to be held in the hands of the few and the oligarchs to have access to it and nobody else to have access to it. And that's where I think you would be in trouble. Final point, and I'll open it, pass it back to you, is what's really interesting is the whole China thing. You know, the things we've been told about China is that they have stolen or bought a lot of their IP from corrupting American politicians, taking the technology from whatever, SAPs, like special access programs from the United States, people with security clearances, people like Hillary Clinton. If that's true, just assuming that narrative is true, it's interesting now that it's China now reintroducing this technology, which is undermining NVIDIA, undermining these oligarchs, and that's now being weaponized against the American oligarchy. I find that very, very, like, what irony that the oligarchs sold their Chinese counterparts this stolen IP that was, like, you know, under classified records. They sold it to the Chinese. The Chinese apparently were going to use it in a war against America. That's what we've been told. And now, oh no, actually they're going to flood the market with this technology that ostensibly, allegedly, they maybe stole from America, but now they're going to give access to the public, and the public's going to use it against the oligarchs to, you know, bring about this golden age that Donald Trump's talking about. I see that all as a net positive if it unfolds that way, assuming. I mean, there's a lot of ifs there, but I'm encouraged by this. I think this is good. It's good for the public to get access. If this was happening off stage and we didn't know about it, that would scare me. But this is all happening out in the public, and that's encouraging.
Yeah, I agree. I unfortunately, I'm looking at the time and I'm realizing I got a 2:00, which is 4 minutes ago. So, but yeah, no, and I think Trump's response to it was also very classy. That this is a net positive, and we should see these sorts of things as opportunities. These are not like things to be angry about or have our egos slighted about. It's just that we're dealing with is a battle to keep human ingenuity and creativity in a little cage and controlled, so that the cage can always get smaller. As human beings are told, we have to live with less. And that whole line of Malthusian logic is being blown up on several fronts right now. You know, mining water, you know, like pure elements instead of like the old way from water. I mean, I love that. Fusion torches, creating plasmas, fusion, 4th generation nuclear tech, breaking the boundaries of the earth by seeing ourselves as a galactic species, as our nature, and that the entire galaxy is our habitat. That's our ecosystem, is the galaxy. It's not this like isolated little minimal Gaia worshipping ball, you know, that we're told is all that we can expect forever, is to just live with diminishing returns on a little localized ball with third rock from the sun. Like, all of these myths are being exploded with the reality of human discovery and the sharing of the fruits of those discoveries through breakthroughs in advanced technologies. And that's what makes human beings human. That's what should temper the behavior of an economic system. Our sense of value, of our sense of what economic investments are, should all be tempered by that higher reality of the obligation to constantly progress qualitatively and quantitatively. And if we lose that sense of true progress and a love of scientific and technological excellence, then we will always atrophy. Like, you know, you're either going to decay or you're going to get better, but you can't stay fixed. If you try, you get worse. And that's the oligarchy. They want to create an idealized state of live in the moment, just be some peasant, thing that just doesn't change. And it's like, no, that's an illusion. It could never work that way. We have to accept excellence. Otherwise, we're going to go for atrophy. So this was fun, Gordon. I really appreciate that. I hope everybody got something out of this show, and look forward to next week.
Yeah, everyone, please hit the thumb on your way out. I know that we had the RFK confirmation hearing happening simultaneously, so appreciate everyone sticking with us. And we will see you next week.